Recently, we had a ceasefire resolution adopted by the UN Security Council, but it doesn't seem that Netanyahu and his administration are caring about what's going on at the UN Security Council and what they're asking for. And when you look at the situation right now in Gaza, do you think this continuation of the conflict in Gaza would help Israel? Have they already achieved any of those objectives that they wanted to achieve?
No, coming back to this resolution, it's interesting to see that in the very session in which the resolution was presented, you had first a presentation of the U.S. ambassador, who said that they are committed to the implementation of this resolution, and that Israel is committed to that too, and so on. And just a few minutes later, the Israeli ambassador said there is no way they will negotiate with Hamas, and there's no way they will engage into negotiations. So, yeah, in the very same session in which the US committed to implement this, where the Russians explained that they abstained because the resolution was lacking some details that would help implementation of it. And in the very same session, the Israelis said, well, there is no way we will comply with that. So we see that these within even the Western camp, if I can put it that way, you have discrepancies, and you have people, they're not able to have a common vision of what should happen. And this is interesting because this resolution, by the way, the US resolution, is based on a proposal that was made by Hamas before. The interesting thing is that Hamas, basically the same layout, with one major difference, is that Hamas, because you have three phases, basically, in essence, it's a resolution that provides for three phases to reach a kind of a agreement of permanent ceasefire, let's put it that way. But the interesting thing is that in the Hamas project, each phase was timed with a deadline, so that basically you would reach the first, you would complete the first phase before reaching the second one, and so on and so forth. And the reason why the Hamas did that is that they know that the Israelis, they said, okay, we do that, but in fact, when it's open-ended, then they never complete the task they are supposed to do. That's what's happening with the Oslo agreement, for instance, that the Israelis said, okay, we signed, but they never went through all the tasks they are supposed to do, including, for instance, recognition of the Palestinian state, because it's never the best time to do it. So it's always postponed, and so it become an open-ended issue. And that's exactly what Hamas didn't want. But the US, in order to please the Israelis, have removed this kind of timeline you had in Hamas proposal. So it's the same proposal, but without any timeline, if I can simplify a little bit. As a result, Hamas said, well, this is pointless, because we know that Israeli will not comply with that. They will do the first step in order to get a few prisoner or hostages back, but then everything will continue. But the whole thing is that that's the point of view of Israel. But in the rest of the world, and when I say the rest of the world in that circumstance, it's the whole world, basically. Because if we look at this crisis, probably even more than the Ukrainian crisis, where you have this divide between West and the South, as it comes to Israel, more and more, you have the West against the West. You have the world against Israel, more and more. And everybody understands that Israel is not behaving the right way. And that's something I think the Israelis have underestimated, or maybe they rely too much on their lobbies, the lobbies they have in each country. I don't know, but what is certain is that they underestimate the poor image that they have in the world. And there are some people who raise this question that I have already mentioned, that if we don't pay attention to that, Israel may disappear. And you have more and more people coming to that idea, because even the Jews themselves cannot identify themselves with the idea of Zionism and the way Zionism is implemented. I don't know. I have no specific, let's say, opinion about whether Zionism is a good or bad thing and all that. It's an ideology, period, and I take it from there. But the thing is that, as any ideology, you have good aspects and bad aspects. But what comes to the surface today are only the bad aspects of Zionism. And that's the problem, because more and more people understand that this is not viable. And if Israel is just a Zionist country instead of being a Jewish country, and it will never survive. And you see that in the West, I mean, United States specifically, very strongly, but you see that in France, in Europe, generally speaking. Only the mainstream media seems to be the make some resistance and try to support Israel. But in reality, we see that it's almost a lost cause. And what we have seen in the just yesterday or so, in the last couple of days, that the Israeli army decided unilaterally to have tactical pauses, and against the advice of Netanyahu. And that's an interesting point. Basically, they didn't, I mean, the Netanyahu never approved the idea of having tactical pauses. And now you have the Israeli army decided by itself that they have to make a pause here. And that relates to what we had a few days ago when Benny Gantz left the governmental coalition, because there is no strategy. There is no understanding of how to end the conflict. It's open-ended, because for Netanyahu, the problem is not to solve the problem. The problem for Netanyahu is that as long as you have war in Palestine, it keeps him out of jail, if I can put it bluntly. So, in fact, Netanyahu has a personal interest in continuing war and having this kind of warmongering mood in Israel. But the reality is that everybody understands, and you see that more and more people understands, that the Hamas is probably not as bad as it was portrayed in October. And that's what I explained in my book. It's the other book, this one, the one behind me. Where I explained the whole issue of the 7th of October, why it came about, and how wrong was the Israeli strategy in addressing the Hamas, the Hamas after the 7th of October. But and now you have, for instance, just a couple of days ago, you had this article in the Times of London that in fact debunks the hoax of the mass rapes performed by Hamas on the 7th of October. So meaning that you see, especially in the English-speaking mainstream media, people start to think about this and understand that everything we are witnessing today in Gaza is based on a narrative, and this narrative was deliberately false and falsified in order to allow the mass murder. You have now, I think, I might be wrong, but I think there are 12 countries that have joined South Africa in the CIG, so the International Court of Justice, ICG, sorry, the International Court of Justice in addressing the question of genocide in Gaza. So meaning that the international community realizes that this initiative of South Africa was not just a kind of a accessory thing. It is essential. It is central for in our approach to international law, to the implication of the international humanitarian law, what we used to call the law of war, and that's exactly what the West starts to realize, and all that happens, in fact, against Israel. And my view is that if Israel continues in the way it has started this war, I think nobody will be interested in Israel anymore. And again, I've said that on your channel, I think. But and everything shows that we might have, at the end of the day, a decision of the ICG that Israel is performing a genocide. Now, think about it. If this happens, who would like to buy weapons or to sell weapons to a country who is performing genocide? Who will then argue against initiatives such as the BDS, that is that everybody is fighting against in the West, this initiative of boycott investment and sanctions against Israel. And this was started a few years ago, by the way, because Israel is selling products of the occupied territories as Israeli product, whereas they should be Palestinian products. So that's a starting point of this BDS initiative, which is absolutely, from a legal point of view, it's absolutely correct, because even the European Union has ruled that it's illegal to send a product that was produced in, let's say, West Bank as Israeli product. But again, the narrative is that it should be forbidden and all that. But who will fight against BDS if Israel is considered as genocidal? Who will want to go and settle in Israel if it's a genocidal state? Who will be proud to wear the Israeli flag if it's a genocidal state? All these questions may affect our understanding and our relationship with the state of Israel in the future. And the way the things are going seems that we are heading towards a recognition, or let's say a decision, that Israel has performed genocide, that it has performed massacres, and we have every day we have new testimonies and proofs and evidence that Israel is massacring people, civilians, and all that. So who would trust such a state? So we start this discussion with the conference and in Switzerland about Russia, and Justin Trudeau mentioned the question of the abducted children in 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 Ukraine, that these abducted children that the Russians had allegedly abducted. In fact, they put these children into safety with the agreement of their parents. I'm trying to find now if I have, because there was a very interesting piece that I recommend that you go to see with the Gray Zone. You probably know this media. They Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, and other. They do an excellent job, and they have made this. You can go, there's a small movie, you go to the Gray Zone, and a US journalist has found these children, and you would say that these children are absolutely not abducted. They are put into safety, and with the agreement of their parents, and some have been returned to their parents and all that. So everything happens in accordance with the parent. Why would the Russians in fact abduct this guy and all that? This makes absolutely no sense. So we have, on the one hand, Vladimir Putin indicted by the ICC for having put children into safety, and on the other hand, you have the situation in Gaza where you have thousands of children who have been bombed deliberately, knowing that there would be collateral damages and that the bombs and the equipment used will harm civilians. So we have here a total discrepancy between the two. And in fact, the interesting thing is that I think Trudeau is, well, I'm not sure he's it's a very intelligent person, but in any case, he mentioned this specific case. And by mentioning this case, he makes even more blatant the difference between the two. And what we are accusing the Russians of is nothing, virtually nothing, and really nothing as compared to what the Israelis are doing in Palestine. So if you put that into perspective, you would see that I warned. I mean, it's not the first time that I mentioned that, but I think we have to be very careful. I mean, Israel has to be very careful about the consequences of what the country is doing. When I say the country, I include also the Israelis themselves, because when you have citizens who prevent humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, when you have civilians, Israeli civilians, destroying the food that is supposed to be distributed to Gaza, to the Gazian population. I mean, it's certainly Benjamin Netanyahu and the government, that for sure. It's certainly also the Israeli forces and that, but it's also the population. It's a mood. And that's the behavior which is more and more condemned by the international. I think nobody originally, I think there are no more anti-Jewish, anti-Semite people than anti-Arab or anti-Muslim people or anti-Christians. It's, I think, depending on the country you are, you have these sentiments that exist everywhere in the world. But the way you behave under the umbrella of your religion, that's what discredits you and in fact creates this the hate, and in the particular case of Israel, this anti-Semitism. It's not because nobody is born as anti-Semitic, but when you see people behaving that way, then how can you avoid them to become anti-Semitic? That's the real problem. And I think that's a question that the Israelis should really think about, because again, I see more and more interviews and articles of people saying that Israel might disappear. And what we mentioned about Ukraine might very well happen to Israel as well. So I think we have to pay attention to that. But again, the key of the solution is in the behavior. It's in the behavior. And remember that now we had to invent the bad behavior of Hamas to create the hate against Hamas. But now we discover the bad behavior of Israeli. So you see the problem. For the Hamas, we had to invent, to put lies that have been debunked, by the way. But for the Israeli, we don't need to lie. We just see to observe. And that's the big difference. And that's the kind of thing we have to be aware of. And I think it's a tragic evolution, because I think it's a poor situation. I mean, we are just worsening the situation. We shouldn't capitalize on hate, regardless on the side. And interestingly enough, we have, I think, I don't know if it's on this channel, I mentioned the question of these hostages or prisoners that were released by the Israeli forces. And here again, we see that these Israeli prisoners had been well treated, that they have been fed properly, that they even they got a little bit more fat, and they were well treated, they were happy. While on the other hand, what we see, the pictures we see from Palestinians having spent a few months into the Israeli jails, have lost weight, have been mistreated, have been beaten, have been tortured, and all that, while the Palestinians had been properly treated. I think someone used to say, said that you can see the grandeur of a population in the way it treats its prisoners.